In this episode, I speak with Michael Quinn of Morne Microgreens based in Northern Ireland. Although early in his microgreens business, Michael is doing a great job of bringing skills from previous careers into his microgreens production and talks about the importance of incorporating a social impact element into your business model right from the beginning. This week, I'm talking with Michael Quinn of Morne Microgreens. Michael is based in Northern Ireland, and Michael is very much in the startup phase of his microgreens business. And while we tend to talk to a lot of experts over the years, the goal of this podcast series is to look at and speak with the non-experts while they're deep into their startup, deep into new things. And so you're getting that real-time perspective. Thanks for joining me on this podcast, Michael.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So what I'd like to start out with is just getting a little bit of background information about our growers and their growing setup. The thing I'm always most curious about, though, is what got you interested in microgreens in the first place?
Yeah, so I started growing vegetables a couple of years back, and then started with a few patches in the garden, and then I bought a polytunnel, and then another polytunnel. But then I had a sort of a barren phase of winter and did not have a lot of food coming in, so I started to play around with microgreens. And at the same time, a friend of mine owned a vegan shop nearby, and he was starting to buy in microgreens from a now competitor. So he was basically encouraging me to sort of try growing these as well at home. And then I started growing on. And that sort of started as a couple of trays on Amazon to eventually turn into a semi-professional setup I have now.
So I hear contrasting experiences from people. One is I'd known about microgreens for a while, then decided I could do it. And for other people, it's, oh, I heard about these and I just had to do it. So it sounds like it's something maybe you were a bit aware of and then were able to move in that direction. Or what was it like learning about microgreens in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, so that we're always a few years behind the US. I lived in the US for a number of years and I would come back here and a few years later things would land. I'd been doing in there for years. So it's not a very well known thing here. So there's a big education curve in all the marketing and deals we do. But I say I definitely tiptoed into it, both growing on the growing side, just because of that. I just didn't know if there was a market for what basically is like a freemium vegetable as a food product. So it was with, a toe in, I went, and I was fortunate in the way that my friend that owns the cafe, like I knew I pretty much had some guaranteed sales there, even if it's only going to be a small amount to get started. So I knew I had some sales if I started growing this, and I knew it'd be a great marketing outlet. He was in the community that I would want to get involved in. And so I was fortunate there.
Right. And that sounds really very serendipitous because the one thing I see in a lot of the microgreens forums is people hesitant over marketing their product. They
Mhm.
can do the setup and they can grow it, but marketing seems to be a big barrier for a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely. And we're still trying to figure this one out. Like I'm only six weeks old at the stage of actual selling, but the whole social media world, especially on the marketing side, has just been completely new to me. Like I did not have Instagram on my phone. I was not an Instagram user. I barely used Facebook in years. So having to go into that world daily and with a lot of effort again is still a shock to the system. And thankfully my wife helps a lot with that kind of things. But yeah, getting your messaging right, getting your content right, thinking about all the channels around marketing, there's a lot there. And my previous corporate job before I joined this was working for a marketing technology firm. So thankfully I had a bit of an understanding over what's involved, but it's definitely a learning curve.
Right. Yes. I've experienced that very much in a similar way. So can you tell me a little bit about your growth space then? I know there's lots of different setups. How are you growing and what's your space like?
Yeah, so I'm growing I bounced around a few different rooms in my house. I started in the summertime in a room that had lots of natural light and heat. And then the last 6 weeks since I started properly trading, I moved my space into my own little small office here. Oh man, it's probably 3 meters by 3 meters. I've got two racks and each rack will hold about 10 by 20 trays. So the traditional cocoa coir soil, I've got my overhead fluorescent light and dehumidifier fan, traditional YouTube setup, if you would be.
Okay. So you say you've been 6 weeks in basically in your selling phase. What was your sort of startup from the time, your length of time from, okay, I guess I can do this, let's go, to that beginning of that 6 weeks? How long was your sort of initial getting to know microgreens phase?
I'd say about 2 months. Started growing the usual standard first four of sunflower, broccoli, radish, pea, and then taking it from there. So I was growing those, making mistakes, learning, figuring out what trays are not very good, ordering different equipment and scaling up, getting different packaging in. And during that phase, I was selling just to my friend in the cafe, and he was taking like a few boxes every week. So I was getting to get some early feedback on even like packaging and labeling and playing things with that, figuring out insurance and all of that stuff at the same time. So there's probably like a 2 month ramp up phase. And I knew I was going to the US on vacation for a week at the end of August. So I just put like a red line saying, when I come back, that's it. Like I didn't want to start trading and then have, hey, new customers, I'm leaving for a week, 10 days. You're not going to get any produce.
Yeah. So that's good to know. That 2 months timeline is really interesting because I've talked to a grower on the weekend who's been like an 8 months timeline. I know for me, it was about, yeah, from deciding to do it to first sale was probably about 10 months many years ago. It's interesting to see what that spectrum of timelines looks like. So you make this decision, you become aware of microgreens, you're going to try this business. How did you learn to grow microgreens? You talked about the typical setup. I know the setup well. We see it all over the place. But what was your approach to learning the microgreens craft?
So I started out probably the usual routes. It's a mixture of YouTube, podcasts, and then getting the basics there and then going into the courses. I think I bought 2 courses, to be honest. One of the very popular ones, and then another one with an Irish guy who started a microgreens podcast and course over here. And I liked his style, and I knew he would be able to really help with the local suppliers and local climate, all of the sort of conditions that are different. Most of the content out there is US focused. It's in ounces, all of that. So I did all of that and I got a little bit frustrated with that. Then I went with so I done 2 courses, a lot of podcasts, and then, yeah, a lot of the YouTube stuff.
So it sounds, and I'm glad you brought this topic up. It sounds like that being able to do a course and get some information that was regional was really important for you because, yeah, a lot of the courses can be very focused on instructors' experience or their region. But it sounds like having somebody in Ireland, of all places, having a course was really important.
Yeah, definitely. Not just for the basic things, right down to metric versus imperial, or grams versus ounces, and knowing what densities to do rather than having to like do the conversions all yourself. To the suppliers, where to get good soil, where to get your seeds from, and particularly in our post-Brexit world, where you're not allowed to post seeds around anymore. It's a whole new difficulty. So yeah, and the climate, like getting invited, listening to some of your podcasts and listening to other people or like talking to people who are growing in Southern California, completely different challenges versus wet Ireland.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I lived in the UK for many years, and now I'm on the south coast of or the west coast of Canada, and it's a very similar climate. And I'm often noticing people here in Florida posting about the humidity and the heat. I'm like, what? But
Yeah.
and this is something that applies to all scales of farming. How you grow tomatoes in California is very different than how you grow them in the Pacific Northwest. That's good. It's really great to hear that aspect of your experience. Okay, so you're 6 weeks in, you've got your friend's place as a market. How else are you marketing your product?
So social media is probably our main outlet, just posting all the time, doing all the traditional ways, trying to get into that community of healthy vegetarian, so on. We've done one farmers market a few weeks ago. We're doing another one now this Saturday. And that's a good marketing outlet, definitely getting word of mouth out there. The sort of people that come to farmers markets generally are a little bit more interested and are willing to pay a little bit more for a local sort of premium product. Knock it on doors, to be honest, just looking at any quality restaurants in the area and just messaging them directly on Facebook or on Instagram saying, hey, I've started this business. Do you want to check out some free samples if I come in? So that's the restaurant route, just doing that. Yeah, I'd say that's probably where we are now. I haven't really dived into the paid advertising yet, and that's intentional. I want to really get my messaging perfect before I start to pay, be it through social or even like local newspapers or things like that. And I want to just get the messaging down and make sure that's connecting with people and people are understanding what the product is, how to use it, what the benefits are, all of that. And then we'll probably do a bit more of a push. And I'm also holding back a little bit and doing any mass marketing because it's still going to be very localized. But I'm holding back because I want to be sure that I'm ready to scale and take the orders. Because at the minute, like my racks are full. I've got my Thursday harvest and then I've got the Saturday harvest for the farmers market and I'm full. And I don't want to disappoint people, especially if there is a grow cycle here. So I always want to have a bit of spare product where I can give them something straight away.
Can you talk a little bit about getting your messaging down? It seems to me the messaging is very clear. They're local and they're nutritious. I'm wondering and I know it's being mildly facetious, but it's the messaging.
Yeah.
I wonder what is particular about messaging that's important to you.
Yeah. I think I'm not sure if this is a local thing or just, as I mentioned there, there's maybe lack of education of what microgreens are. So maybe in the US or in certain different places, they have a foundational knowledge. They've seen these things before. Most of the people I go to here just think it's watercress. It's the only experience they've ever had with a mini vegetable. So you have to explain what this is. This is available in a multitude of flavor profiles. It's explain the nutritional benefits versus an adult vegetable. I explain why this is a premium. So I think there's a whole, you have to put a narrative around all of that, even like the sulforaphane thing around broccoli and explaining, it's just going into those details for people. And it's not just a small expensive packet of salad leaves you're selling them. And also how to use it. I had a customer a few weeks ago who just took a mixed box, which had like spicy radish and I had sunflower and pea and broccoli and she put it all in the smoothie blender and mixed it up. She said, my stomach wasn't right after it. And I was like, yeah, radish will probably do that to you. So now I've got a section in my marketing around how to use the products.
Nice one. That's a great story. So the other thing you touched on there actually is this expensive little box of greens. How has it been for you finding the price point for your market? There's a range of prices out there. I noticed that prices are on the very high side. I would not buy microgreens. They are very expensive, but very inexpensive to grow for ourselves. So what has that been like finding what's that point is for you in Northern Ireland?
I completely connect with that statement. Like I was not buying the microgreens that my friend was selling. I was like, no way, this does not make sense. So I actually listened to you and Diego a lot. I listened to a bunch of podcasts, but you were probably the only one out there who said, I want to make microgreens affordable. And I definitely I'm trying to hit the right price point between being affordable for everyone and providing, so I'm at least earning a minimum wage, to be honest. So I price myself, like we're all organic. We have a donation thing, which will come to later, but I'm trying to price myself at the cheapest in Northern Ireland and by a little bit at least. So it's affordable for everyone, but I'm still like, it's too early for me to figure out if people aren't buying because they don't know I exist. They don't like the price. So we're still trying to figure out what that is the optimum price point, and the farmer's market and having conversations with people is good for that. But I get a mixture. I've had some customers who say, no, you're pricing too cheap. I've had others who say, no way, why would I buy that? I can go to a local supermarket and get 10 times that for the same price.
Yeah.
So it's difficult.
That's always a tricky balance. And I still struggle with it. The question, and I don't know if you've asked this, the question I have is the two-part question. It's what is the price point that makes sense for the customer and for my bottom line? And then the second one is, how long is that price point valid for? Customers might buy your product for a while and then be like, oh, this is quite expensive. Like a good part of my budget is going into this. Can you maintain sales over the long term? Not just a year or two, which in business terms is a very short period of time, but as a business model. So yeah, I'll be curious to hear how that ends up working out for you in terms of how long that price point can sustain itself. Are my price too low? I'm not making enough money. Damn, I need to put prices up. or I'm priced too high, I'm not selling enough product. Where is that sweet spot that allows you to maintain that business and growth trajectory?
Yeah. Yeah. And we're definitely still trying to figure that out. And at multiple levels, like I started with a different price list for direct to consumer versus retail versus or restaurants and cafes. And honestly, I'm now trying to rationalize that on just one flat price for everyone, because I find that restaurants really don't buy that much more in bulk. They want maybe a couple of little tubs of coriander. I know a direct customer also want that. So yeah, I probably undercut myself a bit too much. My wife's constantly telling me like we need to increase the prices more, but like I number one, I'm just nervous that they're priced too high. I wouldn't buy them, and they're not going to be affordable for people.
Yeah. So this brings me to maybe leading into another sort of set of questions here. And that's great. Like, really, I love hearing people's experience. And so right now, even though you're building this business, you could find it as a side venture. And a lot of people are doing microgreens as a side venture or a side hustle, as I often call it. So how much does that play into this pricing and the profitability of it? If you're going to start this business and that's going to be your career, you need a certain price and you need a certain scale. But if it's a side hustle, maybe you can be a little more flexible on that. What is that profitability or salary point that makes sense for you, considering you may or may not have other work in the future that balances this out?
That's a really good question. I'm still trying to backtrack into what like I know what or the sort of the weekly revenue I would like. And I know the hours I want to work every week. I'm not trying to turn this into a full-time job. So it is just trying to find that sweet spot, saying I want to spend say 20 hours a week doing this. How much can I produce realistically for that 20 hours? Like you've got doing the growing side of the business and then the business side of the business and the delivery and the harvesting and so on. You quickly realize, I think this is a pretty hard thing to do as a side hustle, unless like you're going to stay pretty small and you're selling a lot to a couple of, or a few customers, a very small customer base. If you have like 20 different customers that you're delivering to every week, like just add up that delivery time, the driving time, the harvesting time, packing all those up. And like your 20 hours is really going to get cut into, never mind doing your bookkeeping and your admin. And then throw on your marketing. So there's a whole breadth of work here that I probably didn't appreciate before I started. Like I saw the normal YouTube videos, side hustle to earn $5,000 a week or whatever they are. Like it's definitely a false promise. There's a whole breadth of work here. Like you're running a business essentially. Now that said, you can obviously try to do like the MVP of everything. Like you can skip the website. You can have a really minimal social media. Your bookkeeping could be a Google Doc, but I think it just depends who you are. Like if you want to do everything right, everything is a deep hole of trying to get it perfect, not perfect, but the way you want it.
Yeah, one of the themes I'm trying to touch on a little bit in these podcasts as well is what I'm calling reality check. And it's come up a few times where people say, courses don't tell you about this. That is another topic, which I won't get into now. Being someone who offers an online course, and I feel like a good portion of the course is telling you how hard it's going to be, which is not the general approach, but it is important for people to know that it's not just all this money coming in and when do you put in the order for the luxury car. It is a challenge. So I wonder about that. Thinking about that, does that start to push your price point to the higher end? You're at a smaller scale, and in order to make that 20 hours work, at $4 per 100 grams, it doesn't work very well, but at $6 per 100 grams, now we're getting there. But then you've got this conflict between your values of making this available and accessible to people and balancing out your profitability and making a somewhat of a living doing it.
Yeah, I don't know if I have much room to go to higher price points or that customers would accept it. As I mentioned, some already push back thinking like this is a premium product. I think the only way in my mind, like I'm 100% could be wrong here. The only way I could do that is if I get a good customer base on my current price point, get like loyal customers. And then in 6 months time or whatever, I say, hey guys, like I can't continue like this. So my options are I increase every packet by GP, or I'm going to have to do something or I'd shut this down or whatever. But at the minute, I just don't, I'm just accepting this is the price. This is the way I'm going to make money is just more scale. And I need to get to the sweet point of scale and based on all the equipment I have, based on the time that I want to put in it, I'm trying to find that nice point where I can sell at the current price and I can still making money. And hopefully my time that I need to put in goes down over time. Like if I get a bunch of recurring customers, I don't have to maybe worry about the marketing and the sales side of things so much. A lot of the things we touched on earlier around like getting the messaging right, getting leaflets made, all of that stuff is like one-time work. And I'm hoping it goes into more of a sort of a business as usual mode. And that is my possibly unrealistic dream right now.
You're right in a lot of ways that starting a business, the work is front loaded. You're doing a bunch of stuff that you don't need to do as routine. So all the stuff you talked about, even just getting your domain, setting up your website, doing website copy, that stuff that once it's done, it's pretty much done and you revisit it now and then, often at like, I can't sleep. Might as well check the website.
Yeah.
But there's also the other thing is you're going to become a much more efficient producer as well. A harvest task that maybe takes you 3 hours is going to come 2.5 to 2 hours. So that trajectory may be that you're reducing the number of tasks because they're done and you're just a much more efficient operation because you're getting so good at it.
Yeah, that is definitely the hope. That I wouldn't need to individually cut my sunflower shoots to make sure I avoid the bad ones and the ones with the hulls, and I can just do a nice full chop and put in 30 grams into a box. That'll be fantastic. So yeah, there's definitely room for speeding up the whole the planting, the harvesting process.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing that makes me think about scale in your case is you're early in the model and you've really built like a social impact component into the business. So I wonder, first of all, if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So my last job, the last 4 years before I started this, was running a social impact department for a sort of mid-sized tech firm in the US. And there I was very focused on, we didn't have a massive budget, but we really tried to make an impact. And we zoomed in on the sort of this concept of high impact philanthropy or effective altruism, something we know it as. So really charities in the world that are addressing very high priority causes, but can make a big impact at a low cost. So whatever I did next, I wanted to integrate that into the business from day one. So yeah, I took that across. So basically the model I have starting out is for every large mixed box I sell, we donate a year's worth of micronutrients through a charity called Project Healthy Children. And it's very low cost food fortification scheme that they run across sort of low income countries. And yeah, I just like the concepts. It's not full buy one, give one, but it's like you're getting your nutrients, you're giving nutrients to people in need. Yeah, I just wanted to get that in from day one, just from my values and wanting a social impact point of view. And then also I've seen the impact it can have with your marketing as well and trying to connect people who share the sort of your philosophy and the same values.
Right. So I'm noticing as I get older, I become more and more risk averse. And so I do things very incrementally. And I wonder, so it's a great component of your business. Is there a risk of incorporating it into the business model too soon, as opposed to like getting things down, reducing the number of hours you need to do in the startup phase so it's not so stressful, and then adding that as profit comes in and you're more stable? That would be my approach just in terms of mitigating risk for the business overall. But it sounds like it was really important for you to have that there right at the startup. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I'll probably answer that from the perspective of my old job. It's very important. Any corporate, any business, I feel it's so much easier to do this at the start rather than waiting down the line when you know what your profit margins are and you're going to have to make that decision. Go, wow, do I cut down my profit here? Do I want to do this extra work? Whereas if he's just there from day one, like the choice is done, it's made. You have to then put profit on top of that. This is all based on a group called Pledge 1%. So what it does is try to get tech startups to go in and pledge 1% of their equity, 1% of their profit, and 1% employee time from day one. And Salesforce started this. Huge companies that did this on day one And then down the line, when they IPO'd, et cetera, we're able to throw like basically billions of dollars into their charity fund because they made that decision. And I just mentioned that because companies that came to talk to us about that had the exact same question you did. Can we afford to do this now? Is it a distraction, et cetera, et cetera? It's not really. You make the commitment. I make a donation like once a month. I'll go in and check how many large boxes I've sold and I'll make the donation. That's it. There's no real effort here. It's a cost overhead, undoubtedly, like just on the line item cost. But time-wise, it doesn't take any more time.
Right. And I really like that approach that, so when I'm doing a business plan and I'm looking at my thing, I'm like, okay, I'm going to have labor, I'm going to have insurance, I'm going to have rent and electricity, and I'm going to have my 1% of donations. What's my profit? So it's like you're just building it into your core operating costs.
Exactly. Yeah.
I like that approach. It really puts strong emphasis on like essentially redistribution of wealth built into this neoliberal capitalist economic model.
Yes.
All right. So what I'm going to do later today is modify the Urban Micro Crop Planner. So there is a page that specifically allows you to allocate a certain amount of and you can decide whether it's revenue or profit towards a cause. And then you can adjust the percent you want to donate.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. And there's a lot of great charities out there. Like I could send you some notes afterwards that you can include. And I have very high impact for low cost. Your money really goes far if you do a little bit of homework and you direct it in the right places, basically.
Yeah. So here's another topic that I hadn't really thought about discussing here, but I'll bring it up because you are in this phase where you need to start making this decision or decisions like this. So we've talked about a little bit about financial viability. We're talking here a little bit about social. And then the third component, when we look at a triple bottom line, is the ecological component. Now, you talked about growing organically, which is, I think, a strong value that almost every microgreen grower in the world has, which is quite amazing. A few hydroponic growers using chemical systems, but they're still very basic. So I love that aspect of things. But we are using different soils that are coming from around the world. You said you're using coir. I've used like a peat-based soil. And there's issues with these products. There's some ecological issues and some social issues. And then there's the packaging. We're putting stuff off in plastic clamshells and things like that. So thinking again about where you are in the startup phase, what kind of process are you working with or looking at for dealing with ecological aspects of what you're doing?
That's a good one. I'm wrestling with that one. So I did deep dive into packaging and I compost a lot here because I've the polytunnel out the back. All of our waste pretty much goes into the compost and then in the soil next year. And I was getting compostable packages from various cafes, restaurants, taking them home thinking, this is great. I was putting them in my compost pile. Nothing was happening with them. I was like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
Then I started to do my research. And at that stage, I had already bought the similar products to package my stuff in. I did the research and basically it says commercially compostable. So if you own a commercial facility, they'll break down in 6 to 12 months. That is zero use to most people. So I'm really stuck on this one. I try to buy my packaging. It's PLA or made from plant waste. So it's not oil-based made from, but regards to where it goes next, if it's compostable or it's just recyclable, I'm not sold on the compostable thing right now. And that could be a lack of education on my side. And I'd say probably another element of that is I need to make a decision whether I spend an extra, whether it is 5, 10p a packet on compostable, or I direct that to the donation program. Where do I see the better impact there? And for me, I think just with my background, I know I can make a bigger impact directing the incremental 5, 10p a week to the donation to like helping people versus avoiding one plastic packaging that may not compost. Even if people do actually compost it, it still may not break down. So I think I want to dive deeper on this, to be honest.
It's a good point. And this is another regional issue because some of those commercial systems don't want that material. In fact, they are not actually in our commercial system here. You cannot put compostable packaging into the system because it takes too long to break down in that system as well. So it does biodegrade. However, I think for some companies, it's actually biodegrading in a landfill. So
Yes.
we went through a similar thing, and I can't remember what we decided on packaging wise, but what we were really pushing is these are definitely recyclable and you could reuse them in your own home, because we couldn't, same way, we couldn't find that balance in that regard. And if you looked at selling, the way people really try to avoid packaging is by selling a live product. And is that something you've explored as well?
No, based on just various learnings throughout, like going with live trays and soil into kitchens and all of that, I've tried to avoid. And one thing in the future, I may look if I got a good steady customer base, I could talk about let's buy glass and then refill these every week. That would be the only way I could see myself going. I don't see myself going down the live tray route. Even just like delivery, I can't comprehend how you package all 6 different varieties of 25 grams each into live trays for people. And yeah,
Yeah, there's some logistical challenges there for sure. A lot of people try it, and I don't know that it lasts, but I know some people have found ways to do it. So again, it seems like a really regional thing, and what's going to work for someone else may not work for you. And I like the idea of using a container that's reusable, that maybe you have a deposit on it and people are returning it, you're washing it, and that way you've got something really in circulation for a very long time.
yeah. Hopefully we can revisit that one in a few months once I get a steady customer base. And I think people would be up for that as well. It can be pretty inexpensive to buy a bunch of glass jars from large Swedish furniture manufacturers. Yeah. So hopefully we'll tackle that one.
Yeah. So I wanted to go quickly back to your setup and getting set up. Now, we joked around a little bit at the beginning about the typical setup. When you see the YouTube and internet path, there's some pretty specific setups that people suggest, and they make a lot of sense. And I wonder about what it was like getting that setup happening. Were there particular things that were very difficult to procure? And I'm thinking about this in two perspectives. One, which is universal, and that we have gone and are going through a pandemic, which really disrupted supply chains. And so that's something that people are experiencing universally. But also being in Northern Ireland, like what was easy to source and what was difficult to bring in terms of getting set up?
Yeah, it was definitely different. So I'd be watching all the usual resources and seeing all the supplies and under the YouTube videos and going, this is completely irrelevant to me. First thing is tray, 1020 trays don't really exist over here until a few months ago. So I actually would so we have like 519 garden tray. So I was growing in them, but no one publishes seed densities for those. So you're like doing a translation of square of your area and trying to backtrack that from your 1020s. That was the first thing. So I started in all these 519s that are really deep, but smaller. I then bought a bunch of trays when I was on vacation in the US and like had a full suitcase of bootstrap farmer trays. Oh, sorry, UK started selling 1020s. So that was one thing I'd say. I was great finally to get 1020s and I could just copy densities now. And then seeds, this is very specific, but we obviously had Brexit over here. Northern Ireland is in a strange limbo of arguments between the EU and the UK. But basically, you aren't allowed to buy seeds from the UK. So all seeds now I have to come from Ireland, which are great. There's some great manufacturers and I get all my stuff now from the south of Ireland, but it is like a higher price point. And there are just smaller amount of choice just because Ireland's like a very small country. UK is 38 million, Ireland's 5 million. There's more manufacturers in the UK. So I think they are two things that were very local to me that were difficult and still like posed problems. Like if I seed seed supplier doesn't have a variety, like that's it. I can't buy it anywhere else. It just doesn't exist. Like a chef asked for lemon balm and I asked for another couple of things today. And I'm like, I can't get those.
Wow. Like I know in North America, we're lucky here in Canada. We've got this seed supplier that's been operating for decades. They specialize in microgreens and sprouting seeds. It's this gift. And I can see lots more of these companies popping up in the United States. But without seed, you don't really have much of a business.
Yeah, definitely.
That is definitely, yeah. I hope you are able to find some solutions to that over time. And let's just not talk about Brexit because it sounds particularly complicated. Northern Ireland.
Yes.
So we've covered a lot of stuff that I wanted to cover there, and I think we covered a good range of things. I wonder if there is something about startup that you're experiencing that you think is important to share with others. One, in terms of maybe the regionality of startup, or two, just this thing that you've drawn, and you've talked about this, you've drawn from your past career quite a bit, stuff that you're bringing over that's really elucidating some of the challenges that might help other people in the startup phase that they're not getting from the sort of typical online content that's being shared at the moment.
Yeah, I would say one thing that in retrospect, I think it's a good idea, it could be a bad idea, is having a partner. And I say this for multiple reasons. Like you're coming in with certain skill sets based on what you've done before. You could be great at the business side, you could be great at the sort of the farming, growing side, could be introverted, extroverted, good at sales, not good at sales. So having a couple of different people to basically specialize in different aspects of it, I think would be really useful. And the second reason, and the main reason I'm saying that is the commitment needed to do this is it may not be full-time job as in a 9 to 5. It's an everyday job. Like you have to get up every day and water your stuff and plant your stuff and get all that. You don't get to go away for 2 or 3 nights on vacation, I find. So having another person who can just step in and take it over, can be trusted to take over the watering and the looking after everything is priceless, I think. And that's one of my challenges right now as I realize I've just chained myself down here. I don't see how I can now step away. Like I was going to go to Corfu for 3 nights this weekend from a holiday that was booked mid-COVID and got delayed multiple times. Myself and my wife had to go away and I had to cancel it because I am getting these new customers. I don't want to have to, number one, I'd be missing a harvest and delivery. I'd also be missing the next week because I wouldn't be able to plant the stuff and grow the stuff for the next week. So you're almost taking like a double hit. And maybe down the line, I'd be able to go to some customer and say, look, I'm going away. You're not going to get anything. I can double down a week's order or I can do this, but I'm not at that stage yet where I can do that to people. So I think someone else to step in would be good, a partner.
So that's an interesting point because when we think of the idea of a side venture or a side hustle, the idea is it's maybe something that's fulfilling, but it's bringing in some extra money, which in essence is often meant to give us more opportunity because maybe we have a higher income. But here we're talking about a side venture that can really limit what you can do because of its the regular needs of production.
Yeah, that's it. Like I left my corporate job because I wanted more freedom in my life. Ultimately, I wanted my time back. And I've somehow managed, and this was one of the reasons I tiptoed into this. This was a factor like how much commitment it is going to be. This isn't like an online business where you can go away for a few weeks and let it earn money while you sleep and all of that. This is a full-time business you're getting into, and you need to go into that with eyes open, or else you need to create some very nice workarounds or have some understanding customers that you want to go off for a week's vacation or 2 weeks vacation once or twice a year.
Yeah, and I experienced the same thing and ended up turning my business into a cooperative in order to bring more people in for that very reason. And our model was we had 5 people running a business that 2 or 3 people could have run easily, but it gave everybody flexibility to come and go and take time off. And it was on the bottom line, it was a challenge, but in terms of flexibility, it was key. So do you feel like the content that exists now, that it's pushing microgreens as this way of being independent? This is something you can do on your own, which you can do, but then you can't do anything else?
Absolutely. No one ever mentioned this on any course or podcast or anything I've done. You should have known you've got a task list every day. When you go away for days, it's not going to get done. But I feel like, yeah, this is not really covered. And what are the sacrifices and the downsides of being a microgreen grower? You got to factor these things in.
The other thing that comes to mind here is this is not a go to work job. This is a work in your home job. And so there's a couple things as well, like you're always in your workspace, essentially. And I guess here's the loaded question, which we maybe can edit out of the podcast is how many vacations are you going to be able to cancel before your wife says, sorry, Michael, you're done with microgreens?
That's a good question. My wife actually, we don't need to get into what she's doing, but she's been asked to go and travel to Iceland in December and then go to New York for work and elsewhere. 3 months ago, I'd be like, fantastic. I'm coming with you. Free hotels. I'm going to just going to go on holidays, basically. Now I'm like, I got to stay here. I can't go away. So this is a tough one. I've got tickets to the Rugby World Cup in France in September 2023. So that's a month-long event with multiple games I have. So I'm saying, like, in my mind, honestly, I'm saying like 2 years. I've got to figure this out. This business has got to evolve to a stage by then where someone can come in and take over it. And this is just like me very early thinking, like, either do I sell by that stage? Do I bring someone else by that stage? What are the options by then? But that's in my mind. I've said 2 years. I'm willing to forego the vacations. I'll maybe like a night away. I'll be all right. I'll get watering, but like vacations, nothing for 2 years. But yeah, I need to figure this out. It is a long term. It doesn't look like to me right now, this is the long term next 10 years of my life business, unless I pivot it in some way.
Yeah. And I know we may even have done a podcast episode about this, about the idea of having a team. And this is exactly why. One reason is you have people with different skill sets that can fill your gaps. And two, you can go away and somebody else takes over operations. And that can start off as somebody you hire, and that person can eventually become a partner.
Yeah, I was actually listening to Microgreens podcast yesterday by another person, and they had a guest on who had just went on a month's vacation, and she told her customers in advance she was going away. She contacted her competitor and put them in contact with her. They supplied her customers while she was away, and her knowing the risk involved. And she said, if when I come back, you can come back to me. If not, you can continue with them. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting and unique way to tackle the problem. Maybe the competitor would do the same when they go on vacation.
This is true. And maybe we need to get away from the idea of competitors and be more cooperators as well.
That is, yeah. So I was saying competitor. I was thinking, I shouldn't say that.
Yeah. So that's great, Michael. I really love the stuff we've covered there. It was a real pleasure hearing about your setup and your growth trajectory. Too bad you're not going to Iceland later in the year, but I'm sure your wife will send you lovely postcards, and we'll be missing you very much. So yeah, thanks so much for your time and sharing your experience with us.
No, thank you. And thanks for doing these podcasts and all the content and material you put out there. It makes it easier and possible for the rest of us to get started.